Where did you like to play as a child? I ask this question a lot because childhood memories shape us into the people we become. Welcome to Play It Forward, a Wearthy podcast. I'm your host, Lukas Ritson. Thanks so much for joining me. I talk a lot about play. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm an educator, and I'm a playground designer. So I wanted to gather some of my favourite people who are advocates of children and nature and create a space to have an honest conversation about getting more kids outside. The power of play is very often underestimated, and I think we all need a little more play in our lives. So, Claire, now that I've hit record and living up to my standard of not hitting record, at least I'm consistent, where did you like to play as an adult?
Well, I live in kind of the middle of a field, and there's an area that's just at the transect. It's like a boundary space between a big old pine forest, and then the bottom part of that is like a deciduous open forest, and there's a little babbling brook. It sounds like idyllic, and it kind of is, with little sloping areas, and that's almost the place that I would say is one of my favorite places because it's just gentle, and for some reason it's a haven in the middle of quite a harsh forest, especially the coniferous forest. You come out of this very dark environment into this little open glade with this little brook, and then head off into a more dappled light on the far side of the bridge. So that's where I like to go. And in terms of playing in that space, I think it's about that, just that sense of joyfulness that I have in my heart when I get to it. So although I might not leap from tree to tree, there's an absolute sense of freedom and joy when I go to that zone.
It's a funny question to ask adults, actually. It's like, where do you play? And then you get that blank look and they're like, what do you mean? And we got to reframe it. It's like, oh, do you have a hobby? And they go, oh, yeah, I got a hobby. So is that play? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think you could have set the record for the busiest person in nature play, for sure, with the amount of that you've got on, the research you're involved with, the study you're involved with. What's your why in keeping busy, so determined on your goals and impacting as many children as possible?
Well, I think you've probably actually answered the question there by saying impacting as many children as possible. So thank you. I think for me, it's I've always been quite an active person, and I enjoy the energy of being active. I think sometimes I need to slow down a little more, but I think in our time, we have a very short lifespan really compared to the planet. I'm driven to do as much as I can in the time I have available to me. And at the moment, people want to hear what I'm saying and they're interested in what I'm talking about. And I think there's a sense that everybody has their time, and this is probably mine and a group of us, not just mine, but it belongs to a group of us who are real nature advocates. And I think if we can really put our energies into doing the things that we think are going to have the greatest impact. And for me, that's very much about building relationship. It's very much about empowering people around me, giving them the skills and the motivation, because then that leaves you a legacy. And that legacy is the thing that I suppose I'm driven to do. So, of course, it's absolutely about impact for children and their time outside. But I think for me, I need to really connect to the adults so that they open the door.
Yeah, and hearing in that statement that there is this acknowledgement of the finite, it's going to end eventually, and it isn't just an end of a cycle. Does that come from your connection with nature, and is that something that you transfers into the learning with children as well? There is a mortality, there is a cycle to this.
There is a cycle to it. I think for me, we talked a lot about my PhD last time, and a big part of that PhD is the exploration of the observable and the unobservable world. Yeah. And I think for me, what that process of reading and thinking does is it helps you define my place really on this planet. And I suppose for me, it's about the fact that I, in the way I am at the moment, have, however many years left, but maybe 80, who knows how old I'll be when I finally shuffle off. But the point for me is that I do believe that there is then the energy I give up at that point will become something else. So I sit on this bridge, if you like, between the scientific world of quantum biology and the understanding of constant energy and about how systems work, alongside this sense of spirit and this unobservable framing. So I think for me, the cycles that you become aware of when you work with the natural world are about life and death. They are about everything has its moment, and that what you need to do is to make the most of every moment that you're engaged with, really, and doing the things that you both love and feel passionate about.
And the value in the unobservable is something I wanted to chat to you about today. It comes up again and again in your work. And I think it's really valuable for our listeners to get your breakdown and clarity on the value of the unobservable. So how would you convey that to our listeners?
I think the best way, and what's really started me on this whole journey really was, I think we spoke before about the fact that, well, I was about 10 years old when my dad died, and that was a massive traumatic event for me. It was completely out of the blue, and at those times you had no counselling about death or anything else. And so for me, my solace was to go for walks, was to go up this, what we call the hill. And on the hill was this massive oak tree. I can still see it now. And that's where I used to stop. So I'd sit there by the oak tree. And I think what's happening in those spaces is that you're aware of something. And I couldn't have told you that at 10 years old. And there's this great writer called Caputo who talks about rifts and shifts in thinking. And what he says is that in your lifetime, in your journey through your life, there will be these moments that just make you stop and think, that make you make connections, if you like, to a bigger picture. And I'm not saying it's religion or spirit, but I'm saying it just helps you understand the pattern of your life. And so for me, that happened when I was at a lovely community, the Rawa community in Western Australia. And talking to people about those elders, talking about their beliefs and their sense of spirit. And so you begin to then understand that we're not a separate species and we are all just human beings on this massive planet. But so I had all of that going on in my head. And then what happened was that I came back to Auckland and started to really watch children. And when you really listen and tune into children, something happens when they go from a very built environment with the walls and the noise and the adult design out and into the wilder spaces, the natural world. There's a calmness that comes upon them. We see higher percentage of children who are happy to be silent. They take just moments where they'll be out in the natural world. And so I began to question, what is it that's happening here? Because we've done everything, we've measured heart rates, we've, looked at pedometers, and all of that stuff is great and it's really good research. And we need it because it's, it's allowed us to say, oh, the cardiovascular development will improve and this will improve. But those are measurables. And so they sit within what you call the Western paradigm of research, which is measurable. But the real essence of actually being with the natural world might not be measurable. It might be something that's altogether more ephemeral and actually is more about spirit and well-being and emotion. Well, how are you going to measure those aspects of it? So for me, I began to really drill down into what I meant. And it was very much about trying to open up a doorway into a conversation about the lives of children being affected by observable things and us in our observation talking about the observables. But there's also the understanding and acceptance that something exists that is unobservable. And so, you dip into this world of religion, which is full of contention. And then you dip into the world of spirituality and you have to then try and unpack some of that. And so for me, I am now very comfortable with the fact that I embrace the observable and the unobservable world. I don't put my name to a religion. I think there is something that is ephemeral, a phenomena that can't actually be listed or written down, but it happens in a moment between where a child almost touches or is in or truly with the natural world. And I think that's true for adults, but we've got so many layers to peel away now because we've built them up through our adulthood. But in children, there's this sense that although it's situated and it's very complicated, it's not as simple as just touching a piece of grass. But I would suggest that there is something happening there, a two-way relationship between the child and the rest of the natural world.
Yeah. And how do you embed that as a part of the culture in your centre and through your educators? Like, because it is quite a big concept, but what's that step you take to open the door? Like,
I think I think there are several things. I think with any new development, what you begin to see is people go to the easy achievable, which is, let me buy this mud kitchen. So they go to, because they think that's the answer, is to buy the resource, right? And then they get the resource, and then it's okay, and children are playing in it, but then you begin to really realize that actually, if I increase the complexity of it by changing up the muds and doing all this sort of stuff, that's great. We've taken another step. So everybody's on this journey, as I would call it, into understanding how children really connect to and work with the natural world. And some people will stay at the point where I just want a mud kitchen and I want this. And so they objectify it, if you like. And then there are other people who realize that actually look at the fascination of that child holding those bits of mud. Look at his precision about how he's choosing which rock to hold. Look at the joy and absolute absorption in his face when he is studying the surface of a rock. So one of the things that you begin to do is to really slow it down, is to say, let's look at these ephemeral things like slowness, like silence, the idea of just the sense of freedom, not only in your physical movement, but also in your mind. And so what you find is that people are unaware perhaps of some of the work I'm doing, but they're saying that, we need to do some mindfulness. We need to do some sit, what Joseph Cornell used to call a sit spot, which basically means you sit out in the natural world. So they're going towards all of this through the lens of emotional well-being and involvement, especially children with high anxiety, stress, things like that. But I would argue those things are part of something that we all need, not just those children who might be identifying with key behaviors. So for me, how do you put it in your practice? Slowness, just working in nature time, not working in a time that's set by a human agenda, giving children more freedom to actually lead the direction of what you're doing, so that you don't feel that the power balance is all sitting with the adult, but there's a much more equivalent, a democratic conversation happening there. Yeah.
And the right of the child, and to have a childhood and to have a voice, is something that's very aspirational, that's happening in Scotland, that's not really happening in Australia. Talking to people that I collaborate with about you coming on, and it's kind of like we're going through a bit of a defeated stage right now with trying to get children's rights across the line, and being in a culture that doesn't hear children. So how do you capture or just be able to honour children's rights in your service day to day?
I think the biggest part, as you know, is for me, is this right to be heard. And I think if you centralise the right to be heard and the right to play, those are the two. And I'm very, very proud actually to be in Scotland, because it is now part of Scottish law. And one of the things about that ratification is that it then affects policy and everything else that we do. But there's these moments every day that you can do that actually help a child develop a sense of agency and a sense of empowerment, if you like. So for me, it starts off with planning. So when we're doing the floor books, when we're writing down children's ideas and theories, they're part of that. They're a co-author of the floor book. So that starts off, your philosophy is that your adults and your children are working together. And one of the things I find quite interesting is that people confuse a child-led inquiry or a child-led, but yeah, cut that bit. Anyway, so One of the things about the child-led inquiry is that people think it's going to be chaos because they think, oh, well, I'll just do whatever the child wants to do. And actually, that's not how a conversation or relationship happens. It's when you meet your partner, you don't say, actually, we'll just do everything you want to do now. The whole point of that democratic process is that you negotiate. Well, which bar are we going to go to? Well, I fancy this one. What do you fancy? So you take that, and that's the way that it works in that early years environment for me is sometimes it's the adult that's leading, sometimes it's the child that's leading it, but better when they're both together. So you're co-constructing it.
Yeah, that's
So,
great. Great. Okay. You mentioned children's rights and children's voice, and that's the instant dismissal every time. Oh, well, you just can't let them go free for all. You go, no, that's not where we're at.
And that's the challenge, is that I think some people who are making decisions, who are putting the walls up that you're maybe meeting right now, have that perception. And so part of what we had to do within the Scottish frame here is that there's been huge amounts of campaigning around what does this actually look like. And so for us, day to day, going back to that question in Auchlone, it is about, all right, so they can't choose, for example, what snack they have, because if they turn around and say, well, actually, I'd like to have 400 sweets on Tuesday, what was the point in asking the question? Because if the child then replies, you're not going to give them 400 sweets on Tuesday because you're trying to do healthy eating. So what we do is we frame conversations, we frame those interactions, and really consult children when we feel that we can actually respond to what it is they want to do. So much of the nature-based stuff fascinates me because, people are producing so much stuff. I mean, you could go on the internet and find 50 bright ideas for outdoor play. They drive me a little mad because I'm like, okay, so who's made up the 50 bright ideas for outdoor play? Well, it wasn't the child. So straight away, we've gone to an adult agenda. And people say, well, I haven't got any ideas. Well, actually, it's your job to consult children to gather what their theories are. So at the moment here, it's springtime. And so there's a huge fascination around birds' nests. So we put together this talking tub, as we do, and with various images and pictures of local birds and things for them to explore and test. And so anyway, as a result of that, they've decided that birds' nests are brown because a bird doesn't have a choice about what kind of colors to buy. So they've devised this bird's nest shop with all these different materials. So they've got wools that we've got from the hedgerow, they've got bits of grasses, they've got bits of mud. So the things that they've put into that frame have been chosen by children, and then we'll look in the autumn time when the nests have been abandoned, we'll look and find out the results of that. Excuse me. So that, it wasn't that we sat down and said, oh, right, everybody, we're making a bird's nest shop. It was coming from children with a curiosity and a question to say, why are all these nests brown? They're really dull. And so from a child's lens, you take that moment and then follow that inquiry. So there's an awful lot around how do you create a rights-based agenda. That's one of them, is to really consider how far up the planning route does the child's voice go. So if you say, well, I sat down and consulted children and I asked them what they wanted to do, and they said, oh, we want to make birds. And then you as the adult go off and get 50 templates for birds. Well, you've only asked them once. That the point of consultation and that approach, that participation, is that we have a continual conversation. Yeah. So that to me is the root of it all, to be honest with you. And then from there is, of course, there's freedom, there's autonomy, but again, there are also times when we gather where it's actually going to be a conversation that an adult has thought of, that they're thinking, actually, in order to progress this thinking, it would be good if we could just focus on this for a minute. And I'm getting more concerned by some approaches which are now suggesting that the adult has no place in that early years environment. And I find that really interesting because I've always worked in areas of significant multiple deprivation. So if I was always just to wait for children to give me what they want or what they could give me, some of those children haven't had the luckiest start. So if they haven't had the luckiest start, how do I then widen their awareness of possibility? How do I then enrich their world if I don't have a co-constructive model that means that I can come in and engage and play with them in that sort of, planning way. So it's a really interesting debate. And I think part of the reason why people are saying, oh, the adults shouldn't get involved is because they know there's a lack of freedom, but they don't quite know how to do that. So if you look at the models like around the bush kindy stuff, Doug and that group, very much, let's go to the forest. Let's, we're not taking anything with us. We're just going to be free. Absolutely perfect. But the time frame for that is maybe a day or a half day. Whereas another model, such as the nature kindergarten model, you're outside from 8:30 till 6 every single day, all day. So you then put some intent in there. You do have some structure. You do have some enrichment going on. So it's important that I think people are sensitive to the needs of children, the needs of family, the environment, the climate, all of that sort of stuff when they start to talk about the model of outdoor education they're going to do.
And being confident as that guide, you don't have and put your hand up as the guide, not the authority. And my pet peeve is the Pinterest trap. Like, I'll just Pinterest this. I'm like, no, don't. Intentional outcomes. We're there all day.
Yeah.
And there's a very blurry line between intentional teaching and intentional outcome.
Absolutely.
And it comes to, these things come from a place of love as well. They have great intention, but it's maybe just a bit lost in, okay, well, I need to get this observation. I'm here for you. I want you to experience these things. But the offset is we're putting our big adult hand into the cookie jar.
There is. And I think sometimes, that's the downside to technology. I mean, technology is fabulous. I mean, look, you and I chatting.
Absolutely.
On other sides of the world. And so there are magical things that happen through technology. But the downside is that on that phone, you are bombarded by the I suppose it's a bit like FOMO, isn't it? It's the fear of missing out. So you think, oh, there must be something else. I must be missing it. Surely the answer can't be within me. And I'm going, well, actually, the answer is absolutely always in you, but it's also between you and the children you're working. That's where the answer lies. So you might get inspiration from Pinterest, but to take anything, whether it's a model of education or an idea from Pinterest, and impose it onto children, for me, then means that you're not working in the rights of children at all. You're working with a slightly different agenda. So by all means, be inspired by it, but think very carefully before it becomes the driver for your work.
That answer feeds beautifully into where I want to pick your brain on this. Your children designed your playground. So how did you facilitate that within like workshopping, getting feedback? Because it's so challenging. I find it, even just posing the question about play to a child instantly sets them in a realm. It instantly sets them off down this corridor. And you go, no, play's actually, and you can't articulate, no, play's this bigger thing, but no, all their awareness is it's a slide and a trampoline and a swing. And so how did you manage that and get past the adultifying of their voice?
Well, part of it, the secret for me does lie in the talking tubs. So when you have a talking tub, if you imagine you as a landscape designer, you are aware that, there's things like pattern, texture, color, all of those different elements of design. But when you're a child, you perhaps don't. So what you do is you get this talking tub and you say, all right, what can I put in here to represent pattern? All right, well, I'm going to find patterns on a flower and take that photograph and put it in. I'm going to find patterns on a pavement that I might think they could afford, and I'll put that in. So you take all this imagery that you've got, bring it together, and then put that into the tub. And then, still thinking about the line of inquiry of pattern in the environment, you would then maybe take a photograph of a child making patterns with loose parts and stones and sticks and leaves, put that in. You always want to look at inclusivity. So you need to make sure that you've got a really good representation of the diversity of people. So you're making sure that you've maybe got a child who's got some walking support or a wheelchair. That's in there too. And then you put the loose parts in. So then you might put leaves and sticks and a few bits of stone together Now that's just around one line of inquiry about pattern. The skill then comes is that when you've got multiple lines of inquiry, so it might be that the centre you're working with wants to look at, I don't know, sand play as an exploration. We would do a talking tub probably just on sand play and give them, like you would do a mood board, you would not do a mood board, you would take the individual photographs. And that means when you get together and those children are all around you, and then we use a big black mat because it's visually nice and plain. And you can get about 13 children around it. So I use the mat for that reason, nice and easy to organize. And then the tub goes in the middle and we go in and children then take out objects in the tub. And what you're doing at that point as the adult is noticing engagement, you're noticing language, motivation, prior knowledge, you're doing all of that stuff. So if a child comes along and picks up a picture and they go, oh, see this is, I go to a park where they have this and I love it because when I spin around on this swing, all the patterns go whirly, 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 whirly. So straight away, you're writing down those ideas, you're writing down what they say. And then a child might say, well, actually, I like this picture that has got these pink flowers. They're beautiful, but I don't like this picture because it's got white flowers and I don't like white flowers. So you're just writing that down with the child's voice. And then you're, as the adult, bringing together all of those desires, those motivations. And I think for children, it's so process-led play that they might say, oh, I like that bench. But your question as the adult is to be there in that moment and say, oh, I wonder what it is you love about the bench. And then for you as an adult, you're sitting there going, oh, yes, that's where I'm going to sit and have my morning tea. But for a child, it says, well, I love it because I can get underneath it. And actually, I reckon I could jump off that bench. So then you start to record movement. So you can say things like, actually, we need objects to jump off. John's really loving the idea of having a bench or something like that he can get underneath and on top of because they want to pretend they've got bunk beds. There's no way an adult designer is ever going to come up with the idea of bunk beds in an outside play area. But because children have the expertise of play, we can write down those brilliant ideas and then integrate them into our plans, into our designs.
And what would be your question of inquiry when they're all sitting around the mat? You put your talking tub in the middle, and
I would frame it. No, I mean, I do frame it. So I would say something along the lines of, well, we've got this amazing opportunity. As you all know, we're going to be changing our outdoor play area. But it's really important to us that we know what it is that you love about this space. And they'll probably at that point start saying to you, well, I love the tree and I love that old bit. And then, then you can say, well, let's have a look in here and see if there's any ideas. Because that's all the talking tub is. It's a conversation framer, if you like. And so, if you put in there 50 pictures of a climbing frame, all right, well, you're going to get a climbing frame out, aren't you? So don't put the climbing frame in if that's not something you want. So it would be wrong and unethical, I think, to consult children about the design of a climbing frame if you A, have no money and B, have no intent of putting it in. Yeah. So far better to consult them about something you can actually achieve, like, let's talk about the types of plants. What are the things we want to do? Well, I like making mud soup. What's in your mud soup? I need green leaves and I need red leaves and I need brown dirt and I need some pine cones. Okay, well, let's make sure we find out then. This is the list. I'm writing it down in the floor book. Let's write down these things. And I've written your name so that you know it's your ideas. Let's see if we can work out which plants are going to give us those things that you need to make your mud soup. That's how we do it.
Awesome. And what's some like little other scenarios where you would use that talking tub? Because it sounds awesome, and I think it's something that people can listen to you chat about and go, yes, we're doing this.
That's the whole thing about the whole floor book thing actually has 4 bits to it.
Yeah.
But most people only ever focus on the documentation in the floor book. So it has the communication book, which is where you're widening it out to the local community. Who is it that's, parents coming in, but outside agencies. And then you've got the family books, which are like your individual documentation for children, but they're very much family orientated. So examples, for example, like in the landscape designing we're talking about, you might say to parents, oh, if you go to the park or if you're out, could you take some photographs of your play space where you like to be at the weekend? We want to make sure that we're including your ideas within our landscape design. That would go into a family book. So each child has their own family book.
Yeah.
And then there's the floor book, and then there's the talking tub. So whenever, probably once a week at least, we're using the talking tub to do the conversation around the possibilities, because that's what it is. It's possibility thinking. These are all the things on offer. These are all of our possibilities. Which bit of this do we feel that we want to investigate further? Because without that, it's like going to a restaurant and not having a menu. And so many people do that with children. And they say, well, I asked them what they wanted to do, and they didn't say anything. I said, well, but did you frame the conversation? Did you help them understand the choices? And often people just look at me and go, well, no. Well, that's maybe what's stopping that from happening then. So the talking tub opens up the conversation. So we use them in any subject. So at the moment, we have a talking tub all around spring, because that's the time of year it is here. And we've got everything from a group of children who are fascinated by little catkins that grow here from the hazel trees. We've got a group that are really fascinated by the idea of nests and nest building. So at the moment, they're making a massive giant nest for the whole nursery to get into. So that's happening in the landscape at the moment. So all of these things, what you're doing is these are all your lines of inquiry. And so line of inquiry in construction of a nest, line of inquiry in terms of the beauty and aesthetic of the natural world. So there's an intent behind a talking tub. I use them all the time. So yeah. They're an integral part of it.
For our listeners that aren't familiar with a floor book, just as an overview.
Yep, sure. It's a large, sure. It's a large book that's done on the floor. That's why it's called a floor book. And it really just documents with children their theories, ideas, fascination. So it's very process-led. Yep. It's done with children, but it's your documentation, which you can then analyze. And then at the back of the floor book is where you have your the curriculum outcomes from the EYLF or from whatever program you're using. So you can track back. You can say, actually, through this lovely child-led inquiry, we have been covering these outcomes as a group. So it gives you that framing, if you like, the evidence that I think not just for outside agencies, but also for children to revisit.
And where could, I know you have some trainings and resources on floor books as well.
Yeah, that's all on the Academy website. So it's just mindstretchers.academy.
Awesome.
So you can go on there, and there's a whole series of free downloads called the Inquiries, which take case studies from all over the world now using it. Yeah,
brilliant. And I'll put the links in the show notes as well. I'm trying to just I'm racking my brain and like, oh, I'm going to do talking tub here and there and everywhere. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Once you get into it, especially as a landscape designer, I think, you know, the idea of children being truly involved is always a fine line, because we had even down to the process at the end of doing the landscape where the children are doing the risk assessment. So the risk management often, you know, sits in the place of the adults. But when you take, for example, photographs of a landscape you've just made, and then you bring that back for children and say, right, okay, this is what you've now got. You've got to be a bit humble, because they will tell you the truth about, well, we asked you for a spider's web and really you just gave us a rope. Not really getting that. So you take that because you've opened up the conversation. So absorb that, open criticism. But it's lovely to then get the whole process from the initial ideas through the decision making, right the way through to the children at the end reviewing the installation, giving you the risk assessment, and being part of that in one book. And that's what the floor books do. They show long-term evolution of thinking. You're going to be hooked. You're going to be hooked.
Oh, for sure. I already am. I haven't done one yet. Risk assessments by children. You got to give me some notes on that. How do you do it?
Sure. I mean, I think it's quite an interesting one, isn't it? That risk often sits in the head of the adult. And I'm like, if you do a risk assessment and you don't involve the stakeholder, then actually what's the point of part of your risk assessment? It makes you feel good, but actually if you hand the idea of not being safe as possible, but safe enough into the head of the child, then actually you're going to really empower them to make wise decisions. So for us, it's always, what's the tricky here, which is the hazards. What's great about doing this, of course, that's the benefits. And what are we going to have to think about? And that's your procedures. So you take those three elements, and every time you're either dynamically outside with children, just in the moment, or whether it's doing a risk assessment of an object or an area of play, we always have a sheet that has the children's voices on it.
Yeah, I love that it's just
main one.
A constant practice of could fall into the realm of advocacy for supporting children. You're like, what's your voice? What's your voice?
Mm-hmm.
What's your voice? It's so good because I feel constantly, and not constantly, but regularly, that I have to be like, I have to be the person to speak up now, because there's no one's thought of a child whatsoever. And a friend of mine, Hayano Mosa, he calls himself the childest, because his mission is just to make people think of children. Mm-hmm. And just be constantly like, no, this is a part of it. And yeah, he's doing amazing work. For parents, educators who don't have access to a natural space, and this is a question from Claire at Children of the Wilderness. She runs an amazing program. My daughter went there. So it's like it's a family daycare, but when the children get to their home base, they jump in the van and then they're off. They're off to the sea, they're off to the rock pools, the beach, the mountains, everywhere, and they're just exploring every single time they arrive. So I asked her, I said, give me a question. She said, for parents and educators who don't have access to nature space, how do we get them to value the outdoors and then inspire their children to value it too?
Mm-hmm. I think that hangs on your perception of what you mean by the outdoors. So if I can take that back a step and say, right, okay, for me, the natural world is made up of the four elements of fire, earth, air, and water. So I look at the natural world and the presence and influence of the natural world inside my building, outside in my outdoor landscape that I can then create and design with children, and then this sense of wild, which is this going beyond the gate to this bigger area, which is often still affected by people, but not so much. So in that scenario, what you're doing is looking at nature as something that is almost elemental. So my point is always to go to wherever parents are starting. So we can have a conversation about, where do you like to sit on a sunny day? And they'll say, I like to sit on the deck. I'll sit outside with a glass of wine. Oh, great. So you enjoy just being outside. And what is it you love about being out there? Oh, it just feels good, and it's fresh air and just makes you feel great. Okay, well, that's the air, and the sunlight is giving you vitamin D. And then they'll say, yeah, and I'll say something like, and what's your daily routine? I say, I wake up, have a shower. All right, well, the shower really is just rain, but it's warm rain. So playing in that shower and having a refreshing shower is part of your daily routine. And that's exactly what children love. But, they would prefer for it maybe to be something they can put their feet in. Do you like bath spas? Do you like that when you get a foot manicure? So what you're doing is saying water is the element, the sunshine is the element, the leaf. So when you look indoors, at many people's houses, they have, the designer plant, or they have the beautiful herbs growing on the windowsill. Well, that's the plant kingdom. It's just that it's not presented in an outdoor play environment. So really, you could almost argue that the only difference between the natural world outside and inside is the expanse of it and the fact that you're under the sky. That's what outdoor play gives you. It gives you this vista, this I'm under the sky here. So it's an interesting thing for me when I come to Australia, because a lot of people now are putting loads and loads of verandas and sunshades. I understand all of that. I understand the need for it, absolutely. But if you're a child and the only difference between inside and outside was the sky, and you can't actually see the sky because it's been so covered in, what does that mean? What does that give us? And so there is a more unpredictable element. So we don't know when it's going to rain, but you have more stable weather over there than we do here. So there's an unpredictability about being outside. You can control temperature inside, you can't control it out. So when people say to me, oh, we haven't got any nature, I'm like, well, actually, everywhere's got nature, because,
You are nature.
you are nature, but actually it's all around you, the sunlight, the shadows, the small leaves. So when I was working in China, one of the things and Singapore actually, was that we were doing a whole workshop around the potential of leaves. And I knew what was going to come up. So I went to the supermarket, and beautiful markets, absolutely fabulous. And so I just bought a load of vegetables, brought those in, and we did the whole workshop just on vegetables, because I knew the objection was going to be, oh, poisonous, dirty. It was because that's their starting point. So if you take away that and get them to the point of fascination and joy and intrigue and curiosity, hopefully that then opens the door. So I think we can all do something is the answer to that. It's just finding what that little tiny element looks like.
And also what I hear there is anticipating the objection.
Yeah, that's for me as a trainer. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, and getting over that and giving them the guidance once again to give them the materials to get over that blockage, if you will. You touched on it there. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think there, you can find people who are a little bit purist about nature-based work, and this is the only way. And I'm like, well, there are millions of ways of us doing this. So I think I suppose what I was trying to make really clear there is that there shouldn't be that sense of this is right and this is wrong. It should be much more about the relationship that we build as a human community that helps us, in essence, really start to grow and understand the relationship we have with the wider natural world. But you've got to have millions of different starting points for that to take place. And it's about being humble, I think, and just realizing that everybody's on a different point in that journey, and we can all get there. We can all move forward, but we'll be doing it at different rates in different ways.
Yeah, and as it's gained traction and there's more people coming into nature play now, in like more of a service provider type of realm, it's something I've definitely observed. It's like, well, we do it the right way. Well, our standards are this and this. But also, just because you're right in your way doesn't make me wrong in my way.
Absolutely.
Constant having to overcome that. And I can be right and you wrong, and that's okay as well. I've heard you say it time and time again. You've got inside, outside, and beyond, to paraphrase you. But then what we're forgetting in the realm, and something you mentioned, and it might feed back into the unmeasurable, is how do we honor the inside being internal of the child? And then what's around them beyond.
Yeah, it has two meanings for me. Most people realize, when I'm talking, it's always about location, inside, outside, beyond. Its secondary meaning that came through in the thesis was inside, as in self, soul, identity, who we are as humans. So there's an awful lot of that internal, not just for children, but for adults and for the human race. And then the outside is our relation to the people around us. And our relation to people around us is about community. It's about, if you're in a setting, it's about making connection to family and things like that. So in that sense, the outside is just our small bubble, if you like, that we're in. And then beyond is about us as a global society. And so your global society really is the thing that I was most fascinated by. And the International Association that you mentioned at the beginning, the International Association of Nature Pedagogy was born because there were so many people coming in saying, oh, we want to be part of a movement. And so, we've really just limited it now to the Facebook group. But that's lovely because it's self-sustaining. It's about, sometimes we'll put up just a stunning picture. So this morning I put up and shared a picture of a beautiful piece of film of a swan coming in through the mist. And it just, as an adult, gives you that sense of joy that might be enough just to help you get through a moment today. Who knows the impact of it? But it's a meshwork. And I think I keep talking about meshwork, so people keep looking at me going, oh, you mean a network? And I'm like, nah, because a network has dots and it has defined hubs, whereas a meshwork comes from Ingold's work, really. And it's this whole thing I talked to you about last time about the mycelium and the underneath the mushrooms. Yeah. That has no beginning or end. It has no single points in it. It has just a coexistence in it. And so for me, that's what the International Association is. It's a meshwork. So it's not led by me. Like, everybody shares stuff into it. And so it has to be something that is owned by all, because if it's owned by all, it will continue. If it's owned by one, it will fail. So that's been really fascinating. And we've used that same idea, the same philosophy of meshwork within the virtual nature school, which has been the initiative we've done through the lockdown.
Yeah, so I know it's accessible to all people now, the online nature school, if my understanding is correct. And so what's it look like? Give us an overview of what an online nature school is, because I know there's those people out there going, you can't have online in a nature school. But Claire Warden's about to prove you wrong.
Well, the first thing is that it's interesting because the virtual nature school has a children's committee, and it has a group of advisory people from all over the place and from Scotland, because it was started here. And so the children will say to you things like, oh, I just, I went off and I looked at that little film, because what we do basically is every week. So the children said they wanted to do various things. So they were with me at the time, so it was easy to do. They'd say things, I want to do bones and big teeth. And you say, so all right, we'll do dinosaurs, but we're going to slow it down here. So we're going to really look at skin, and we're going to look at how we gather evidence, and we're going to look at, the skin coverings, and we're going to look at feathers, and so all of this sort of stuff. So we made films, basically. So there are 5 films in every provocation. You don't have to use the films. You might decide you want to watch them yourself as an adult, and then just take some of the concepts forward. So it's a very flexible school in that sense. And then what happens is that we devised this, a new thing called an inquiry tracker, which essentially allows you to upload imagery like a floor book, but it's a digital floor book. You upload imagery into this meshwork of community of people all doing the same thing, all inspired by child-led inquiry. And then we operate like a professional Facebook group, but it's not as open and accessible as Facebook. But anyway, you come into that Floorbooks club, and so we then share all of that learning from it. So part of it is the lens of the child who is watching the films and just playing, and they're just starting points for children at home or for practitioners. Sometimes it's more about developing the pedagogical principles. And so the adults watch the films, and then they come into the inquiry tracker, and then we talk a little bit more. So it's a coaching tool, I suppose. Yep. So it has all these different threads to it. I mean, if you go to virtualnatureschool.org, that would be the best thing to do. And so it has this very much this children at home, children in setting, and then practitioner focus. So essentially, in summary, it's a series of films made with and for children, to look at how we can create really exciting child-led inquiry, which is centered on the natural world. That's what it's all about. And
you've had an uptake from the government as well, because they've seen the benefit.
Yeah, that was delightful. Yeah, so it came out of the pandemic, and myself and a really good friend, Bravo, the nurseries were all shut, and we went into immediate lockdown, and Bravo phoned me up, and he said, how you doing? And I'm like, I feel disempowered. I feel helpless. So I need to do something, because that's the way I cope with it. So I said, what could we do? So at that point, it started where I would sit and meet children at 10 o'clock every morning. We would watch one of the films. They would either tell me it was rubbish, tell me it was good, or tell me what they were going to do. And that's the point, isn't it? If someone says, do you want this? And you go, well, no, I don't want it, but I want this, then great. Okay. Decision made. And then we would go away and play. And I would meet them over lunch. So we would eat lunch together, because that's the time when most of them were sedentary. So I would get my food, they'd get theirs. We'd sit together with their families. And so that got so popular, I was pretty much doing it every single day. And so it was fabulous during the first lockdown, actually. And those children then, we had children in a hub. because we'd opened as emergency care. So they would engage with the children online. So it's been totally phenomenal. And I think when you look at this idea of devolved leadership, which is where you're really giving agency to people around you, including children and families, then what happens is that magical things come out of it. So out of the virtual nature school at the moment, there's a group of children who are now making films on Makaton signing of nature. We've got a group who are talking in Gaelic. So they're now doing a whole series of Gaelic films, all made and designed by children. So yeah, I'm very proud of it. Yeah, very proud of it.
Amazing. You blow me away. I'm stumped. Anyone that knows me know I'm rarely lost for words, but I'm just like, what are you doing with your life? It makes an impact like Claire. I like what you said earlier about the possibility thinking. Can you just unpack that a little bit for me?
Sure.
Just because I love it.
So one of the things I need to acknowledge is possibility thinking really came from Anna Kraft, sadly not with us anymore. And I think it's really important to acknowledge where we get these ideas from, because yeah, that's just the way we should all be doing it. And so Anna Kraft's work was around almost philosophical thinking. And she was trying to really support people to look at this idea of children having the awareness of possibility, as opposed to the idea that, you know, you can do this or this. So she did lots of work around the wondering question. So I wonder how, I wonder if, what if, you know, what if the sky was yellow? What if all the flowers in the world were black? So she would really push out some of that philosophical ideas. For me, I suppose it resonated with my work because I am a divergent thinker. And that means I'm both in my own world, I suppose I'm what was I called the other day? An educational entrepreneur. So I mean that my own thinking is that I am very divergent.
Yep.
I also believe that children should be given divergence, not convergence. And that's one of the issues I think we have, is that constantly children are being pushed to think in the same way as everybody else. Whereas actually, I believe more individuality, and about, although you're an individual, you're part of a wider community of learning, but you're still an individual with your own thoughts and ideas. And so Anna Kraft's work about, okay, let's think about possibilities here, not about definitions and about, you know, set outcomes. So in my work, it's, I suppose, had already been shown through the fact that we don't write about next steps for learning. I always write possible lines of development. So for me, there's, you know, when you say in your planning, you're going to do next steps, I'm like, how do you know it's my next step? I might have changed my mind tomorrow. So for me, there's always got to be that word of, it's the possible line of development. It's where we hope to go next in our planning. But if it rains tomorrow, then we're jumping in puddles. We're not going to be doing what we thought we were doing. Yeah. So yeah, that's where it comes from.
And linked in with honoring the possibility and possibility thinking is also honoring time and freedom. So what's your techniques in honoring that in childhood?
I think it's about understanding the pace of time. And I recently had a bit of a health scare. And I think what happens when you go through something like that is that there's another one of those Caputo moments. It's that moment when you go, holy moly, this, you know, we've really got to think about every moment. And so one of the things that we do is we talk about slowness, as I talked about earlier on. One of the books I wrote called Nurture Through Nature was the book I wrote after watching Emily, who was only 2 at the time, 16 now. But she was 2 at the time. And I watched her, I wasn't working, and I was with her. And her fascination with, you know, the raindrop that just was dripping and the flower blossoms that came out on this tree helped you realize that actually slowing it down to nature time is a really good, healthy thing to do, because it means that we're not rushing through life, but that we're savoring every moment. And so you'll have seen, if you've seen the virtual nature school stuff, the stuff we send out for parents literally says, take a moment. It lasts a lifetime, because what we wanted people to really do was just, you know, not make a massive change to their lives. But the next time their child's looking at a dandelion, or the next time their young child wants to put a foot in a puddle, take the moment, because if you don't take that moment, then you lose all of that. I think it was Jason Donovan that says you don't, or one of his songs, you don't realize how important a moment is until it becomes a memory.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, crack on. That's exactly it. So not thinking there's a bigger thing to be done, like, oh, we're going to go and do this. We're going to study the whole of the animal kingdom in a week. And I'm like, no, let's just look at feathers. Let's just look at something small, but do it really well and enjoy the moments together.
Yeah. Something I reflect on quite a bit in watching children and how they're experiencing the world now is thinking, what are the memories that so many children are going to be looking back on that represent their childhood? And it really frightens me.
I think one of my hopes is that I was having a conversation with somebody about pigs recently, and Peppa Pig came up, and I don't know if you've got Peppa Pig, but Peppa Pig is everywhere. And I just thought, I wonder if in your childhood you will have the chance to see a pig for real. Will your distortion of the natural world actually be an extension of what you've seen on that screen, which is Peppa Pig, which is two-dimensional, very flat, very, very plain. But I mean, so you think, I believe that the one good thing that's come out of this pandemic in this country, and I can't answer for everywhere, has been the fact that I am seeing more and more children outside, because that is the place where parents have felt that they are safer. They've got to the point where the four walls have just been too much. So we're seeing people going into parks. I think one of the challenges for us is to make sure that it doesn't dissipate, that it doesn't just go back into being just a trend. I need to get it now really embedded in people's understanding, and about actually, we need to be more sustainable. We need to understand this is the planet that we're on, and how vulnerable we are. And let's face it, we were reminded of that by something as small as a virus. So actually, I think it's brought a humility to people, to humans, which is a good thing if we can just get them to remember it.
Yeah, I love the framing of this virus has made people reflect on what they need, not what they want.
Absolutely. And yeah, absolutely.
And I heard through the grapevine that you received a letter from David Attenborough. So being a fanboy of David Attenborough, I've got to know the details.
So, what's really lovely is that I think for me, he's always been my hero. I grew up watching films of David Attenborough, and I'm sure he had an influence in terms of my love of the natural world. And I think for somebody who has always been an advocate for the natural world, he brought it into the lives of so many children.
Yeah.
And I'd finished my PhD, and a friend had said to me, you should send that to David Attenborough. And I was like, no, he's way too important to read my PhD. Why would he be interested in what little old me has written about my philosophies and blah, blah, blah? And so you sit there, don't you? And sometimes you've just got to be a bit brave. And it's the most nerve-wracking thing. I mean, I've spoken in front of 4,000 people, and I was more scared sending him my PhD thesis. And so I sent it off, and someone said, just send it and see what happens, Claire. Take the risk. So I did. And I forgot all about it, really, to be honest, and got on with life. And then one day this letter came. It was an envelope, and it was a recycled envelope with a label over the top, beautifully handwritten. And I opened it up, and there was this letter from David, handwritten in the way that he does, just saying thank you so much, and how much he'd enjoyed it, and how he was honoured that he'd had any influence in my life. And urging me to keep going, and saying, what a great job I was doing. So I just felt over the moon. I was absolutely in floods of tears, because when you get that letter from somebody who you have just idolized, I suppose, all your life, from when you were a young girl, And then they bother to take the time to write to you, handwritten letter. I thought, the most you're going to get is an email. No, handwritten letter. So now it's framed on the other side of the room where I'm currently speaking from. And in those moments when you're sitting there going, I'm too tired, I'm fed up, I can't do this anymore, I look up and I see his letter. And so that's the thing that keeps me going. Yeah. So I don't know if he realizes that that's the impact he's had on me, but through my life, I think, I'd like to think that I'm doing the same for other people, giving them some form of inspiration and helping them feel a sense of agency. So yeah, he's the person that is my one.
And for people that are starting out their journey, they're not at the level of getting a handwritten letter from David Attenborough yet, but they're just starting out. What bit of advice would you give those people that are just starting out in this journey and supporting children in nature?
To believe that no matter how disempowered you feel at times, every single action you make has a ripple effect. So whether it's the fact that, you're in an environment where there's just you and, 20 children, and you think, well, I'm not going to have a big effect here, putting your energies into those children will become those moments that will become those memories that, when they're talking to their parents or they're talking to their extended family, or even when they're grown-ups, they would think back to a moment where they had a sense of muscle memory maybe, or just a deep held emotional memory of something that you did with them. So I think I'm a great believer in the fact that if you make that little ripple, that actually, and put your energy into things that you can actually control and influence, gradually that zone of influence gets bigger and bigger. And the more energy you put into it, then the things that maybe seem too big to even challenge, that's sort of the zone of concern, those things gradually become affected by it. And so, I would say just believing in yourself that every action you take has an impact.
Well, I can assure you that you are motivating, you are inspiring so many people from around the world, including myself.
Thank you.
So much from all realms. So like I chat to you and be like, I can be a better dad, and also to give myself a break, and also buy a playground designer and do this and this and this. So thank you so much for joining us again on Play It Forward. It's an absolute honor. I can't wait to talk to you again and go for the hat trick. And
absolutely.
And I'll put everything we chatted about today, including floor books, thinking tubs. I can't wait to share that with so many people. So thank you so much for joining us again, Claire. You're a legend.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Chat anytime. Take care now. Bye.
Bye.